So we want to bring you news of developments of Barcelona. Quique Setien says he did not imagine in his wildest dreams ever becoming Barcelona manager. He is 61 years of age. Ernesto Valverde, as we know, relieved of his duties eventually last night. Setien has been given a contract to the end of the 2022 season. He said yesterday, I was walking around my hometown with cows around me. Now I'm here at Barcelona managing the best players in the world. So he's a very happy man. Miguel Delaney of the London Independent is there. Hello.
Hello. Hi.
You also a happy man because it's rather convenient when you happen to have had a long sit-down interview with the new Barcelona manager. So that worked out quite well.
Yeah. And actually, I remember we did that interview in August 2018, just after the World Cup, when he was preparing for a friendly between his Betis team at the time and Bournemouth. And we didn't actually publish it until just before they played Barca in October, when he was mooted a bit at the time as a potential Barca manager, but was almost seen as a bit of a kind of a cult figure. And that was reflected in the responses. Whereas when I posted it last night, it just exploded, basically, especially because the way he spoke as well. I think this is the interesting thing about him, is just it's his vision of football, which even speaking to him, you couldn't help but getting enthused by. As a person, I quite liked him after that. I found him really engaging to listen to, and from that perspective alone, I'm actually quite happy for him. But I'm also kind of excited for what he can do. I mean, that Betis team was great to watch, and I think Barca, after a few years when they've almost become, Messi aside, just another super club, we could see something a bit different about them again.
Well, he seems in the face of it like a perfect fit, like very much out of the Cruyff school, and everything Pep Guardiola did, he would have been nodding along in complete agreement with. He said to you, I'm a romantic. I like the football. I'm a spectator. I don't buy a ticket to watch a team stay in their own half waiting for a 0-0 or a counter-attack. And he even said as well, before I signed for Betis, I asked them, why do you want me? You've seen how my team's played, how I play. Are you clear this is what you want? Because he is not a man who's going to renege on his principles. He wants beautiful, flowing, passing football.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to be fair as well, I mean, in interviews like that, when they get right into the technical stuff, you can only put so much in because it just was the nature of it and the way these things are put together. But these weren't just empty words. He started to talk about how he would do that, how he'd build and talk about how the importance of players feeling the ball at the feet. And like one of the more interesting themes of the interview was, and I was even thinking of it in relation to Ireland. I suppose it's something that Stephen Kenny has touched on as well. But when can you really play expansive football like that, or a certain kind of principle of football with what we perceived as limited players? And I think it's the line I opened the interview with, and he said, no, that's absolutely false. Basically, you can play this approach with any level of players. It's about, implementing the system and having faith in it, and also to a degree, trusting players. I mean, it's quite an optimistic school of football, I would say, and that the game should be about, really.
Yeah. He made an interesting point as well, where he said to you, if a team defends and tries to, well, let's go for the Mourinho first half against Liverpool, for instance. If a team sits back and defends and tries to wait for a mistake and nick a goal, which really is the Irish way as well for so many years, he said nobody ever really questions the rationale of that. It is this perverse thing that when a team try to play, so often a coach, you think of Guardiola, I think you reference it in your piece even, Guardiola in his initial stages at Man City is having to fend off questions about why he's playing such attractive football, frankly.
Yeah, completely, yeah. And also because at that point it was being repeatedly exposed, and this is always the danger, that sort of football, that when it goes wrong, it can look very bad. But I suppose the point is always that, and I think this is the point when Setien was talking, and Guardiola was talking about himself, you've got to be brave enough to overlook when it goes wrong. That you've got to trust in the long term, because it's not about getting it right for one game, as kind of Mourinho's approach on Saturday was. It's about building something for the long term that is much more successful over the long term. And I think you have to say, given the recent tectonics of modern football, this is what has won. This is the dominant team. And there's even, I think it's something actually I did in a piece last week discussing kind of Bielsa against Arteta, but there's even a wider argument that whole school of defensive football, of more reactive, restrictive football, has actually been beaten in the last decade.
Yeah, it was quite interesting in the piece that even his comments from 18 months ago have aged very well. That debate was raging even a bit more then. So his playing career, for people not overly familiar with him, he was at Racing Santander. Across 2 stints, he had 350 appearances for them. He was in Spain's 86 World Cup squad, didn't feature off the bench at all, but he was in the squad. A brief stint at Atletico Madrid as well. He's 61 years of age, so this is a relatively late period in his career to get a high-profile gig. People might wonder where he's been for the last 20 years or so.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned in the piece as well, there's a comparison with Maurizio Sarri, really, in that someone that belatedly came into it. And I think just one of those odd cases of someone who it took a while to maybe find their feet or find the recognition for what they were trying to do. I think some of that is connected to some of the clubs he was with, some of the teams. He managed Equatorial Guinea. And I think there's definitely an argument here. There is a certain risk on Guardiola's behalf, because this isn't the CV of someone who takes over a super club that, especially without a single trophy on it. But then the same was said, I suppose, about Sarri before Chelsea, and now he's got the Juventus job. And it was whatever the debate about Sarri and the dissatisfaction of Chelsea fans last season, if you stand back, he certainly succeeded. He got them into the Champions League and won a trophy. And I think that there's a wider point here that Barcelona first kind of articulated or defined, which was, the CV doesn't suit a super club, but when you're a club like Barcelona, so attached to a certain identity, it matters more that your coach fits to that identity rather than actually what he's done in his career. So again, and Barca themselves made this decision in the most famous example in 2008, where it came down to a straight choice between Mourinho and Guardiola. And Soriano and Bigurstein have all spoken about this. They could have gone with the easy option of Mourinho, given that CV, but no, Guardiola just fitted the way they play. And I think that's happening across the board now. It's not just Barcelona. It's that so many of the big clubs are realising as important as a certain guarantee of success is actually a manager who's able to instill or perpetuate a proper identity. That's why Sarri's at Juventus, and that is why Barca have now gone for Setien. And it does pose questions for clubs like Manchester United and Arsenal and the bigger English clubs as well.
No, absolutely. And he's been on the Barcelona radar for some time, we should say, if this seems a little bit inexplicable. There was a famous 4-3 win. Again, you reference it in your piece in the London Independent. And as well as that, 442 had a piece about him. And they were saying on one Real Betis visit to Barcelona, and there's almost something like Xavi-esque patronising about this, but Sergio Busquets, during one of the visits to the Nou Camp, gave him a Barcelona jersey, and it was signed, and it said, "For Quique, with love and admiration for your way of looking at football, all the best." So they've been aware of him, and they've thought all along, he's one of us. Yeah,
he's one of those kind of figures widely admired within Spanish football. I'm trying to think of a kind of a Premier League equivalent that way. Someone that's just maybe hasn't. I mean, there's a certain degree of Bielsa about it as well. Just widely respected without the resounding success, but more seen for kind of the influence had and the way he sees the game. And that was he was always mooted as a potential Barca signing. And it's interesting. Just I was reading back in that interview last night. So much of it does actually seem a pitch for the job, but in the way he was talking, it genuinely wasn't political in that way. It was just him honestly speaking about football, which is again why Barca feel that he's the right choice and can kind of restore some of their identity. And I think it's certainly. I mean, it did look at the weekend as if they were going to go for Xabi, which I think would have been madness to a certain degree. And people will talk about how Xabi, he almost personifies the Barca way of playing and all that. And yeah, that's true. But as a player, as a coach, we don't really have much evidence of that yet. And I think there's a danger with that. And I think Manchester United actually particularly proved this, especially the number of managers. I think they're in their 30s now in terms of the quantity of them that have played for Ferguson. And pretty much all of them, when you listen to them in interviews, they're very good at paying lip service to the Ferguson way. But if it's been proven in their managerial careers that it's a bit superficial, as if they don't understand it on a deeper level. That's certainly happened with Solskjaer, I think. It's happened with Giggs. And I think it looks like it's a possibility with Xavi, given even how people talk about his career in Qatar. Whereas with Setien, he talks about all this, talks about it on a much deeper level, and has also obviously proven it with actual application in the league that Barcelona play in.
Yeah, well, I was going to touch on Xavi with you in a few moments, but seeing as you brought him up, the word is he seems to have turned down the offer and felt he wasn't quite ready. He's forging a very curious post-playing career for himself. Like, he's now into year, going on 6 in Qatar. I mean, look, we all like money and all that, but this is a strange way to go about trying to make yourself the anointed one.
It's very bizarre, and it's actually... I was when it looked like he could get the job. I was thinking of a piece on this and Xabi as a figure, because I think you're right. He's a curious character in that way. And remember, about a year after Spain won the World Cup, there was a brilliant documentary that was brought out in Spain on Spanish TV, done by Michael Robinson, former Irish international, of course, who became famous there. But they had exclusive access to all the Spanish 2010 squad. And right at the end of it, when they're talking about victory and what it means, and most of the players are actually quite endearing in a very human way, talking about it. And then Xabi comes out with all this sanctimony about how we didn't just do this for Spain, we did it for football and the right way of playing. And it's really curious to be, morally sanctimonious about football when then, on the other hand, you're willing to basically eschew a coaching career by essentially taking the quickest and most questionable money from a state like Qatar, given all the questions about how football there is associated to the way the state is run and the various questions about human rights abuses, what is ostensibly slave labour, how construction is conducted there. And because as an extension of all that, by virtue of being in a role like that and being so high profile in a country like Qatar, he's allowed himself to become a spokesman as well. And I think that's something that deserves huge questioning for someone that is so moralistic about the way to play football, which is comparatively irrelevant next to issues like this.
Yeah, and even if you gave him a ginormous free pass and said, well, maybe he's not the most politically aware fellow, the almost purity with which he talked about football and the highest form of football, I mean, that's not in Qatar. I mean, if he was that dedicated to that aspect of the game, he would be doing what Mikel Arteta's done for the last number of years, whatever, but not doing what he's doing. So that was kind of strange.
And even beyond that, I was talking to an Irish guy who's worked a lot that I know that's worked a lot in Qatari football over the past few years, and he was saying that actually he hasn't even been that good out there. That relative to the standard of his team, the resource they have, and some of the players they have, he's actually underperformed a bit. That there's clubs with him that shouldn't be up there at the same level. And the comparison has been made with Pep Guardiola and how Barcelona kind of plucked Guardiola out of nowhere with no experience either. But that's not really true, because all right, Guardiola, there can be as many questions about his own choice of job and going to Man City given their owners, although it's not quite maybe as direct as living in a country like Qatar. But also, he didn't immediately go to a country like Qatar or Abu Dhabi when he was starting his coaching. He actually went and essentially what was ostensibly a world tour to try and kind of deepen his coaching education. He then went back within Barcelona and wildly succeeded with the Barcelona B team. So like the comparisons between Xavi and Pep Guardiola as coaches, I think, are extremely superficial, and it's the sort of thing that can be dangerous to get sucked into in that way. And it's why I think Setien is just on so many levels just a much better choice.
You mentioned his piece the piece with you almost in some respects conveniently read like a perfect application for the Barcelona job. I mean, none more so than what he has to say about Messi. You know, Messi comes up just because he's Messi and you're curious for his thoughts on this player who's dominated the global game forever
just to cut across,
go on.
The way that came up, I asked him whether, because this was August 2018, so Ronaldo had just gone to Juventus, and I asked him whether the question was actually about whether we were about to see a change in a new era in Spanish football because they'd lost one of their two totems, and unprompted he basically said he just doesn't see Ronaldo on Messi's level. Sorry.
No, nowhere close. I mean, he didn't have them in the what he said about Messi was, and again, if they were consulting Messi about whether or not he approved of the new manager, he just needed this paragraph, and it would have got a nod of approval. So Setien said of Messi, there's only one player I've known that has the ability to really decide games on his own and play wherever. That's Messi. When you have a footballer like that who can do it on his own, there's nothing to say. The other 10 are going to say, let him do what he wants. He's going to make us better. We'll win more matches. But there is only one. Everyone else has a role. Everyone else has to maintain the structure. He says if you keep having a player who drifts outside the system, you have to remove him no matter how good he is. But if you can win games on your own, a la Messi, that's fine. So in terms of how he's going to handle Messi and Messi's Barcelona, he's going to handle it just the way Messi would like him to.
Yeah, completely. And I suppose, and that's all the more relevant given there are all sorts of undercurrents around the eternal storm with Barca that Messi essentially runs that dressing room, that decisions are made on Messi's behest because he's such an important figure to the club that really have to keep him content. And it was a sense maybe that he was kind of tolerating Valverde, and that he got really irritated in the summer with how the Champions League campaign went, because ultimately with the primary motivation of his career now is essentially to win the Champions League again and claim the record in the competition that he feels he should have. It's what he wants above all else. I mean, I think, in regards to this and Messi's forces of influence, people might say it's kind of, individualistic and a prima donna-ish, but I mean, maybe there's always a certain level of that. But ultimately, I think it is actually about the welfare of the team he's playing in and winning the top trophies, not anything individual. And the argument remains, a team built around Messi and allows Messi to do what he needs and wants to do, well, it's better than anything else in football. No. So it makes sense then to a manager like Setien in that regard as well.
I'm really curious to see how he gets on, because if you look at the post-Pep era, so that's kind of, what are we going back to now? 2012, it's amazing how time flies. Excuse me. So, you'd leave Luis Enrique out of this, and, a tragic end to his time at the club, obviously. But if you take Tito Villanova, if you take Martino, if you take Valverde, it's even noteworthy that I didn't start by saying, geez, Valverde sacked, why, or what's gone on here? Overshadowed to an extent by Messi, by the club, really. Is Setien the type of character who, in 2-3 years' time, when he gets sacked, that we won't really begin the conversation with, that he will feel like another pawn in this list of post-Pep managers?
Well, I think this is the big danger to the appointment. Not so much his CV or the lack of trophies, but more the adjustment to a club of this size. I don't think it's an exaggeration at all to say that Barca is by far the most idiosyncratic and neurotic club in the world. And because they basically got it right with their principle of play and the youth system over the last 20 years, which is essentially instilled by Cruyff, it's very easy to forget that this was a club whose almost entire history had been just punctuated by crisis after crisis after crisis. And even when things were going well, like with Cruyff, it wasn't too long until a massive crisis was around the corner, and we've seen that over the past few years. They've found a degree of stability that was alien to their entire history. So dealing with that could be interesting, and especially given, I don't want to say naivety on Setien's part, but someone who's talking about that quote we referenced at the start, but someone who goes from, talking about looking at the cows in his village to now managing Barcelona in the space of a day. You would hope that he's not daunted by it, because there does seem a kind of a certain striking element about suddenly taking over a club of Barca. But having spoken to him, I think that's more just his affinity for what the club is, rather than him being intimidated anyway. And I'd say that's the hope. And I do think he will be different to those characters. If you look at some of those managers, Villanova, obviously, I don't know what could have been really, because of the tragedy of his early death and having to leave the job. Although he did continue the Pep way to a certain extent. Martino was always a little bit of a Van Gaal figure in that way, and I had some of the principles of this approach, but in a very kind of flat way.
Enrique, I should correct myself, by the way. Obviously, it was his Spanish tenure that came to a tragic end with his as opposed to the Barcelona tenure. So, look, Enrique, he did all right. Like, he felt part of it, in a way that Martino and Valverde never quite have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was a little bit of outsider about it, and I think that's the feeling with Setien as well. It's not just that he plays their way of football, but he just gets what the club is. And I know that's a phrase that actually come up, but I shouldn't have said that, because that's come up so much lately in terms of in relation to figures like Solskjaer and Freddie Ljungberg. They just get the club.
It's in their DNA.
He gets the football, should I say, not the club. He gets the football, and I think, to be fair, his football has stood out so much in Spain over the past years. He's been so admired for it that it will make Barcelona a bit different again, and I'm kind of excited for what they can do.
I think that's why everybody's quite excited about this now, because Barcelona at their best in the Barcelona way is just an amazing thing to have, even on the European stage. It's, them winning two La Ligas over the last 2 years doesn't quite cut it. So It's potentially very exciting. Before you go, just a quick word on, I'm curious to know what you made of Mourinho against Liverpool at the weekend. More so the first half, because there was just something, I hadn't realised this until this morning when I was reading through some of what he was saying in the press conference. And effectively, it was kind of being put to him about the second half being much better, and they seemed to try and put a bit more pressure on Liverpool further up the pitch. And one of the points he was making was that the players actually can't cope with this high-pressing game, and that physically he couldn't ask them to do it for 90 minutes. And I was thinking, I mean, one, that would be something you would absolutely associate with Pochettino and Spurs. Yeah. And secondly, the irony, given that Solskjaer turns up at Manchester United and makes exactly the same complaint about a Mourinho team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's... Well, I mean, a lot of managers in this situation are self-serving, but I think Mourinho particularly... the one thing you have to remember about Mourinho is that almost at this point, not so much before 2010, but more so when he's begun to be questioned his career, it feels like almost every decision he takes, and sometimes almost every match, is as much a referendum and statement about himself and how he can be perceived as an attempt to try and win a football match. And I mean... I have a certain understanding for how we approach Saturday, given some of Spurs' squad issues and given how good Liverpool have been. But it still felt a little bit of a parody of Mourinho performance, and as if that was all he could possibly imagine. And the great, I mean, this is the thing with Mourinho as well, and especially since 2010, in that what he still remains very good at is convincing people that if he doesn't do it in this particular way, the danger is total humiliation. And that happened a lot at Manchester United. It happened at Chelsea as well and Real Madrid. And I think it is a mode of thinking that's, as we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes, it's out of sync with the modern game where there's a lot more expansion and imagination and adventure to it. And all the more so because I don't think that type of approach, this real backs to the wall, spoiling ball, I don't think it can work as much in the modern game anymore. This is a bigger debate, of course, because but I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that attacking football is now so prevalent, so dominant, and also that teams are actually so much fitter that if you try and just keep a team like Liverpool out for that long, they'll eventually just overwhelm you, which is what happened, but it happened by the 38th minute. And also, I mean, the other side to this is that Klopp has specifically prepared for teams defending against him in the way they did like the way Mourinho has done with Inter to Barcelona, the way teams did to the Spanish national team at that time, and it actually plays into their hands now. So in that sense, it did just feel, well, you can understand Mourinho doing it to a certain degree. It just felt a bit of a parody, and it points to kind of bigger questions about his time at Spurs. Because, I mean, I remember when I went to his press conference the day he got the job, I was actually quite impressed by him and the way he spoke. And it was then, it seems he gets how the game has changed, and he's realised the need for change himself. And yet, since he's been in the job, I've seen no evidence of that. It's actually been a little bit dispiriting, and it feels like that. This is all he can imagine with these players. And you might make the argument that the state of the squad, that this club needs drastic changes. But one of the initial arguments for getting rid of Pochettino was either change the players or change the manager. Yeah. But the manager is much cheaper to get rid of, so you get rid of him. Whereas now, if they have to do both for a manager who feels more behind the times, then it's all, what was the point? Yeah,
and the second half would surely have demonstrated to him that was the better route. That's where they genuinely caused Liverpool some trouble, could easily have got something out of the game. And, you mentioned that Inter Milan team. I remember watching, I mean, if we put that maybe as peak Mourinho, like a peak achievement to do that with that team, you remember watching them then, and one, it felt slightly miraculous, but what was the subtle difference with how Liverpool in 2020 are able to see the picture and understand exactly what the opposition are doing and digest it very quickly and be comfortable with it. When Mourinho was doing it with Inter Milan in 2010, they felt in control of the game even when they didn't have the ball. Yeah. It was, yes, without possession, but it was still on their terms. Whereas if you fast forward now 8 years, the same setup, the same lack of possession, it's not on their terms. Liverpool are in complete control of the scenario, and that necessarily wasn't the case a decade ago.
Yeah, and the other side to that as well, don't forget, is actually everyone remembers the second leg, which was ultra-defensive. But the first leg, it was a counter-attacking performance, but a counter-attacking performance with real trust. And a real cutthroat to Barca in that first leg when they won 3-1. And this feeds into the wider argument of Mourinho, that it's not just that he's slightly past his best, but maybe that he's lost some of his own adventure in that way. That, I mean, it's one of the big arguments here from a lot of people that worked with him, from that know him, that Madrid changed something in that way and maybe caused him to lose some of his nerve in that regard. And it certainly seems the way in the fact that these performances seem to become more and more parodic.
Yeah. Well, we'll watch what happens when he goes to Daniel Levy looking for 200 million over the next couple of weeks. Listen, Miguel, Quique Setien, it's on the London Independent website. Never before. This was the easiest, most read article of your life, my man.
And especially in contrast to when I first put it up in October last year, 2018.
No, finally, 2 years later. Listen, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Cheers, Joe. Thank you.